The luxurious New York cafe bustled with activity, its elegant interior filled with well-heeled patrons. Aisha, a young immigrant waitress, moved gracefully between tables, her dark hair neatly tied back and her uniform crisp. As she approached a table occupied by Margaret and her friends, she couldn't help but notice their disapproving glances. Margaret, a woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer clothes, leaned in conspiratorially to her companions. "Can you believe they let someone like that work here?" she stage whispered, loud enough for Aisha to hear. Her friends tittered in response, their eyes darting towards Aisha. Aisha's hands trembled slightly as she set down their orders, but she maintained a professional demeanor. Margaret continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "I mean, look at her. She clearly doesn't belong in a place like this. What's next? Letting the riffraff from the streets dine here?" The laughter from Margaret's table grew louder, drawing attention from nearby patrons. Aisha's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she pressed her lips together and tried to focus on her work. She'd encountered prejudice before, but never so blatantly in her workplace. At a nearby table, a young man named Daniel sat alone, his attention caught by the unfolding scene. He frowned, his fingers hovering over his phone as he considered whether to intervene. The influencer in him saw a potential viral moment, but the decent human being in him felt uncomfortable with the blatant display of prejudice. As Aisha moved to another table, Margaret's voice carried across the cafe. "It's not that I'm prejudiced, you know. I just think there should be standards. Don't you agree, ladies?" Her friends nodded enthusiastically, their jewelry clinking as they gestured in agreement. The atmosphere in the cafe grew tense as more patrons became aware of Margaret's comments. Some looked away uncomfortably, while others shot sympathetic glances at Aisha. The young waitress kept her head down, trying to maintain her composure as she continued her duties. Daniel's frown deepened as he watched the scene unfold. He knew he should say something, do something, but fear of confrontation held him back. Instead, he discreetly pulled out his phone and began to record, capturing Margaret's hateful words and Aisha's quiet dignity. As Margaret's comments grew increasingly offensive, Aisha felt a surge of anger and determination rise within her. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and approached Margaret's table once more. "Excuse me," Aisha said, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I feel I must address it." Margaret looked up, surprise and annoyance flashing across her face. "I beg your pardon," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Aisha stood her ground. "I understand you have opinions about who should work or dine here, but I want you to know that I work hard for my place in this establishment. I deserve respect, just like any other person." The cafe fell silent, all eyes turning to the confrontation. Margaret's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Undeterred by the silence, Aisha continued, "My mother came to this country with nothing but hope for a better future. She worked 3 jobs to put food on our table and to give me opportunities she never had. Every day, I strive to honor her sacrifices." Margaret's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. She opened her mouth to retort, but Aisha pressed on. "You see me as someone who doesn't belong, but I am the embodiment of the American dream. I work hard, I pay my taxes, and I contribute to this society. Your words don't just hurt me. They diminish the struggles of countless immigrants who have helped build this nation." As Aisha spoke, her voice grew stronger. She noticed some of Margaret's friends nodding slightly, their expressions softening. Even some nearby patrons murmured in agreement. Margaret, however, was not ready to back down. "How dare you speak to me like this? Do you know who I am?" she sputtered, her composure cracking. "It doesn't matter who you are," Aisha replied calmly. "What matters is how you treat others. Your status doesn't give you the right to demean anyone." The emotional appeal in Aisha's words was palpable. She wasn't just defending herself. She was standing up for every person who had ever felt marginalized or looked down upon. As Aisha finished speaking, a tense silence hung in the air. Margaret's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly torn between their loyalty to Margaret and the undeniable truth in Aisha's words. The power dynamic in the cafe had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Daniel, still recording with his phone, quickly realized the significance of what he was capturing. As Aisha finished her impassioned speech, he stopped the recording and immediately began to upload the video to his social media accounts. "This needs to be seen," he muttered to himself, typing out a brief but impactful caption. "Brave waitress stands up to blatant discrimination. This is what courage looks like." Within minutes of posting, the video began to gain traction. Notifications flooded Daniel's phone as people started sharing, commenting, and reacting to the powerful confrontation. The hashtag #StandWithAisha quickly emerged and started trending. As the cafe slowly returned to its normal buzz, both Aisha and Margaret were oblivious to the digital storm brewing outside. Margaret, visibly shaken but still defiant, gathered her things and stormed out with her friends in tow. Aisha, meanwhile, returned to her duties, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Online, the video continued to spread like wildfire. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet. "This waitress is my hero. Disgusting behavior from that woman. She should be ashamed. This is the America I believe in, standing up for what's right." However, not all reactions were positive. Some users defended Margaret, arguing about freedom of speech and political correctness gone mad. The video became a lightning rod for discussions about immigration, class, and privilege. As the day progressed, major news outlets picked up the story. Journalists began calling the cafe, seeking interviews with both Aisha and Margaret. The cafe owner, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, decided to close early, sending all staff home. Aisha, still unaware of her newfound internet fame, walked home in a daze. It wasn't until she checked her phone that evening that she realized what had happened. Her social media accounts were flooded with friend requests and messages of support from strangers around the world. Margaret, on the other hand, was facing a very different scenario. As she sat in her luxurious apartment, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Friends and acquaintances were distancing themselves, and her social media pages were inundated with angry comments. In a panic, she called her publicist, desperately trying to control the narrative. As night fell, the incident at the cafe had become more than just a local dispute. It had ignited a national conversation about prejudice, immigration, and the power of standing up for oneself. And at the center of it all were Aisha and Margaret, two women whose lives were about to change dramatically. The day after the incident, the ripple effects of Aisha's confrontation with Margaret began to manifest in unexpected ways. Sarah, one of Margaret's friends who had been present during the altercation, found herself unable to sleep. The memory of Aisha's words and the look of hurt on her face haunted Sarah. As dawn broke, she made a decision. Picking up her phone, she typed out a message to Aisha through the cafe's social media page, apologizing for her complicity in Margaret's behavior and asking to meet in person to make amends. Meanwhile, Aisha woke up to find her world transformed. Her phone was filled with messages of support, interview requests from news outlets, and even job offers from companies eager to associate themselves with her courage. As she scrolled through the notifications, feeling overwhelmed, a knock on her apartment door startled her. It was Daniel, the influencer who had recorded the video. "I hope you don't mind me tracking you down," he said apologetically. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday and how we might be able to use this moment to create real change." Aisha invited him in, curious about his ideas. Daniel explained how her story had resonated with people worldwide and suggested ways they could leverage this attention to address systemic issues of discrimination and inequality. Aisha listened intently, seeing an opportunity to turn her personal experience into something greater. Across town, Margaret sat in her lavish living room, surrounded by her remaining friends. The atmosphere was tense as they discussed the fallout from the previous day's events. Margaret's phone rang incessantly with calls from her lawyer, her publicist, and former associates distancing themselves from her. "I don't understand," Margaret said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "It was just a private conversation. How did this get so out of hand?" One of her friends, Jessica, spoke up hesitantly. "Margaret, maybe we need to consider that what we said was wrong. The way people are reacting, it's making me think about things differently." Margaret stared at Jessica in disbelief, feeling betrayed. As the conversation continued, she began to realize that her circle of influence was rapidly shrinking. For the first time, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, forcing her to confront the consequences of her actions and beliefs. As the day progressed, Aisha and Margaret's paths continued to diverge. Aisha, with Daniel's help, began to plan a community meeting to discuss immigrant rights and workplace discrimination. Margaret, isolated and panicking, called crisis management firms, desperately trying to salvage her reputation. The incident at the cafe had set in motion a series of events that would force both women and those around them to re-examine their beliefs, their actions, and their place in society. As night fell, it was clear that the repercussions of that fateful confrontation were far from over. In the weeks following the incident, Aisha's life transformed dramatically. Her story had struck a chord with people across the nation, and she found herself thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of resilience and dignity in the face of discrimination. Aisha's phone rang with an offer from a prominent tech company known for its progressive stance on diversity and inclusion. "We were impressed by your courage and articulation," the HR director explained. "We'd like to offer you a position in our community outreach program." Overwhelmed but excited, Aisha accepted the offer. It was a far cry from her waitressing job, but she saw it as an opportunity to make a real difference. As she settled into her new role, she couldn't help but think of her mother's sacrifices that had led her to this moment. Meanwhile, Aisha's mind kept returning to the countless other immigrants struggling to make their way. She began to formulate an idea for a scholarship program that would help immigrant students access higher education. With her newfound platform and the support of her new employer, she started to lay the groundwork for the project. Across town, Margaret's world was crumbling. Her social calendar, once filled with charity galas and exclusive events, was now eerily empty. Former friends and acquaintances avoided her calls, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Even her country club membership was under review. One afternoon, as Margaret attempted to have lunch at her usual upscale restaurant, she was met with cold stares and whispers. The maitre d', who had always greeted her warmly, now seemed hesitant to seat her. It was a stark reminder of how far she had fallen. Back in her community, Aisha was busy organizing a fundraising event for her scholarship project. Local businesses, eager to show their support for diversity and inclusion, offered sponsorships. Even a few celebrities, drawn by the viral nature of Aisha's story, pledged their support. The event was a resounding success. As Aisha stood on the stage, looking out at the diverse crowd of supporters, she felt a surge of hope. "This is just the beginning," she thought to herself. "We can create real change." As news of Aisha's success spread, Margaret found herself struggling to maintain her lifestyle. Companies that had once sought her endorsement now distanced themselves. Her social media accounts, once a source of validation, were now filled with critical comments and unfollows. The contrast between Aisha's rise and Margaret's fall was stark. While Aisha was building bridges and creating opportunities, Margaret was facing the consequences of a lifetime of unchecked privilege and prejudice. The incident at the cafe had set in motion a chain of events that was reshaping both of their lives, and by extension, the community around them. Months after the initial incident, fate brought Aisha and Margaret face to face once again. The setting was a high-profile charity gala in New York City, an event focused on promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Aisha, now a respected speaker on these issues, had been invited as an honored guest. Margaret, attempting to rehabilitate her image, had managed to secure an invitation through her remaining connections. The atmosphere in the opulent ballroom tensed as Aisha and Margaret locked eyes across the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people recognized the two women at the center of the viral video that had sparked nationwide discussions. Aisha, composed and confident in her elegant evening gown, stood her ground as Margaret approached. "Hello, Aisha," Margaret said, her voice strained with forced politeness. "I hope we can put our misunderstanding behind us." Aisha met Margaret's gaze steadily. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Margaret. It was discrimination, plain and simple. I'm here tonight because I believe in creating a world where such incidents don't happen, not to pretend they never did." Margaret's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly. "You have to understand, I've suffered too. My reputation, my social standing." "Your suffering was a consequence of your actions," Aisha interrupted firmly. "Mine was a result of prejudice I've faced my entire life." The confrontation drew attention from nearby guests. Among them was Sarah, Margaret's former friend, who had been working to educate herself on issues of privilege and discrimination since the cafe incident. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between the two women. "Margaret," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I think it's time we acknowledge our mistakes. Aisha is right. Change begins with each of us recognizing our biases." Margaret, flustered by Sarah's unexpected intervention, lashed out. "You too, Sarah? After all our years of friendship? I see you've joined the politically correct mob." Aisha remained calm in the face of Margaret's growing agitation. "This isn't about being politically correct. It's about basic human decency and respect. Something that shouldn't be controversial." As Margaret opened her mouth to retort, she became acutely aware of the disapproving murmurs around her. The very people she had hoped to impress were now witnessing her mask slip, revealing the same prejudices that had led to her downfall. Realizing she was fighting a losing battle, Margaret retreated, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. As she hurried away, the crowd parted, many openly showing their support for Aisha. The confrontation, brief as it was, left a palpable impact on the event. It served as a stark reminder of why they were all gathered there, transforming the gala from a mere social event into a powerful moment of reflection and commitment to change. As the night progressed, Aisha found herself surrounded by supporters, both old and new. The incident had only strengthened her resolve to continue her work. Margaret, on the other hand, left the gala early, the weight of her actions and their consequences finally beginning to sink in. The aftermath of the charity gala confrontation proved to be the final nail in the coffin of Margaret's social standing. The video of their initial encounter at the cafe had resurfaced, gaining renewed attention and sparking fresh outrage. Margaret's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Her social media feeds were flooded with angry comments and calls for boycotts of her events and businesses. The hashtag boycott Margaret began trending, with people sharing stories of their own experiences with discrimination. Feeling cornered, Margaret decided to make a public statement in an attempt to salvage what was left of her reputation. She hired a crisis management team and scheduled a press conference. On the day of the conference, Margaret stood before a sea of cameras, her usual confidence noticeably absent. "I want to address the recent events and clear the air," she began, her voice slightly shaky. "My words were taken out of context. I have always been a supporter of diversity and—" Her words were immediately met with skepticism and outright disbelief from the press and public alike. Social media exploded with criticism, calling her statement insincere and superficial. Memes and video edits, juxtaposing her current claims with her past actions, spread rapidly online. In the days that followed, the repercussions of Margaret's failed attempt at damage control became clear. Companies that had been on the fence about cutting ties with her now did so publicly, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. Invitations to social events dried up completely. Even Margaret's long-standing business partnerships began to crumble. Her luxury clothing line was dropped by major retailers, citing a conflict with their values of inclusivity. The charity foundation she had chaired for years quietly asked her to step down from the board. As Margaret watched her carefully constructed world fall apart, she made one last desperate attempt to turn the tide. She reached out to Aisha through intermediaries, hoping to arrange a private meeting to apologize and possibly gain some positive publicity. However, Aisha, now acutely aware of the power dynamics at play, declined the meeting. Through her spokesperson, she released a statement. "True change comes from genuine reflection and action, not from a desire to save face. I wish Margaret well, but I don't believe a private meeting would serve any purpose at this time." Margaret's request for a meeting, intended to be private, somehow leaked to the press, further damaging her credibility. The public saw it as another insincere attempt at image rehabilitation rather than genuine remorse. As the dust settled, Margaret found herself isolated, her phone silent, her calendar empty. The empire she had built on social connections and influence had crumbled. leaving her to face the consequences of a lifetime of unchecked privilege and prejudice. In stark contrast to Margaret's downfall, Aisha's influence continued to grow. Her scholarship program for immigrant students, born from the viral cafe incident, had gained significant traction. Major corporations, eager to demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion, offered substantial financial backing. Aisha stood at a podium, addressing a crowd of eager young faces. "Today, we're not just giving out scholarships," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We're opening doors that have been closed for far too long. Each of you represents hope, resilience, and the future of our diverse nation." The audience erupted in applause as Aisha announced the first round of scholarship recipients. Young men and women from various backgrounds took the stage, their eyes shining with gratitude and determination. Meanwhile, the cafe where it all began had transformed. Under new management, it became a symbol of inclusivity, hosting regular events promoting cultural exchange and understanding. Aisha was invited as a guest of honor for its grand reopening. As she cut the ribbon, Aisha reflected on her journey. "This cafe once represented division," she said to the gathered crowd. "Now, it stands for unity and progress. Let this be a reminder that change is possible, one conversation at a time." Daniel, the influencer who had captured the original confrontation, had become a close ally. Together, they launched a series of social media campaigns aimed at highlighting immigrant success stories and combating stereotypes. "We're not just changing minds," Daniel explained in a viral video. "We're changing hearts. Every story we share chips away at the walls of prejudice." Aisha's influence extended beyond social media. She was invited to speak at universities, corporations, and even government panels on immigration reform and workplace diversity. Her words resonated with people across the political spectrum, bridging divides that had long seemed insurmountable. One evening, as Aisha and Daniel sat in the cafe planning their next initiative, they were approached by Sarah, Margaret's former friend. "I've been following your work," Sarah said, her voice tinged with admiration. "It's inspired me to start a mentorship program for underprivileged youth in my community. I was hoping you might offer some guidance." Aisha smiled warmly. "Of course. Change happens when we all do our part, no matter how small it might seem." As they discussed Sarah's plans, Aisha couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. What started as a painful confrontation had blossomed into a movement, touching lives far beyond that fateful day in the cafe. The scene in the bustling, diverse cafe, with Aisha, Daniel, and Sarah deep in conversation about creating positive change, stood as a powerful symbol of progress and hope for a more inclusive future. As Aisha's influence continued to grow, Margaret's world had shrunk to a shadow of its former self. Isolated and desperate, Margaret made one last attempt to salvage her reputation. She reached out to Aisha's team, requesting a private meeting to apologize and possibly collaborate on a public reconciliation. Aisha, however, declined the request. Her spokesperson released a statement. "While we appreciate Margaret's desire to meet, Ms. Aisha believes that true change comes from within, not from public gestures. She wishes Margaret well in her journey of self-reflection." Frustrated and feeling cornered, Margaret watched from afar as Aisha received a prestigious award for her contributions to social justice and community empowerment. The ceremony was broadcast live, and Margaret couldn't help but tune in. Aisha took the stage, her presence commanding and graceful. "This award isn't just for me," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It's for every person who has ever felt marginalized, every immigrant who has struggled to find their place, every individual who has faced discrimination and chose to stand up against it." As Aisha continued her speech, touching on themes of empathy, perseverance, and the power of community, Margaret felt a complex mix of emotions. There was envy, certainly, but also a growing sense of shame and realization. "Our society is strongest when we embrace our diversity," Aisha continued. "When we recognize that our differences are not threats, but opportunities to learn and grow. The path forward isn't about erasing our past mistakes, but about acknowledging them and committing to do better." Margaret listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time. The words struck a chord, forcing her to confront the reality of her actions and their consequences. As the ceremony concluded and the cameras panned across the cheering audience, Margaret turned off her television. She sat in the silence of her now empty mansion, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. In that moment, Margaret realized that her life and reputation weren't just tarnished, they were irrevocably changed. The world had moved on, embracing the values that Aisha championed, while she had been left behind, clinging to outdated prejudices. For Aisha, the award was another stepping stone in her journey. As she left the stage, surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, she felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. She knew that there was still much work to be done, many more minds to change, and many more voices to amplify. The contrast between Aisha's rising star and Margaret's fall from grace served as a powerful reminder that true change comes not from superficial gestures, but from genuine introspection and a willingness to evolve. As night fell, both women faced the future, one with hope and determination, the other with the difficult task of rebuilding not just her public image, but her entire worldview. The story of Aisha and Margaret took an unexpected turn when Aisha, after months of deliberation and consultation with her legal team, decided to file a lawsuit against Margaret for defamation and harassment. The news broke like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through the media and reigniting public interest in their confrontation. Aisha held a press conference to explain her decision. "This lawsuit isn't about revenge," she stated firmly. "It's about accountability and setting a precedent. No one should face discrimination without consequences, regardless of their social status or wealth." The announcement caught Margaret completely off guard. She had been living in relative seclusion, believing the worst was behind her. Now, she found herself thrust back into the spotlight, facing not just public opinion, but legal repercussions. As the details of the lawsuit emerged, it became clear that Aisha's legal team had built a strong case. They had gathered evidence not just from the cafe incident, but from Margaret's past behavior, revealing a pattern of discriminatory practices in her businesses and personal life. The court proceedings became a media sensation. Each day brought new revelations about Margaret's conduct, painting a picture of systemic prejudice that extended far beyond a single confrontation in a cafe. Former employees of Margaret's companies came forward with stories of discrimination and unfair treatment. Documents were presented showing biased hiring practices and internal communications that used derogatory language about minorities and immigrants. In the courtroom, Aisha's composure and articulate testimony stood in stark contrast to Margaret's increasingly desperate attempts to defend her actions. The once powerful socialite appeared diminished, her confident facade crumbling under cross-examination. As the trial progressed, it became more than just a case about two individuals. It evolved into a broader examination of privilege, accountability, and the hidden biases that often go unchallenged in elite circles. The verdict, when it came, was unequivocal. The jury found in favor of Aisha, awarding her a substantial sum in damages. More importantly, the judge's ruling set a legal precedent for holding individuals accountable for discriminatory behavior, even in private settings. Margaret, facing not only the legal judgment, but also the complete erosion of her fortune and social standing, was forced to confront the full extent of her actions. The woman who once moved through the highest echelons of society now faced a future of financial ruin and social ostracism. For Aisha, the victory was bittersweet. While vindicated, she took no joy in Margaret's downfall. Instead, she announced that she would use the awarded damages to expand her scholarship program and launch new initiatives to combat workplace discrimination. In her post-trial statement, Aisha emphasized the broader implications of the case. Today's verdict sends a clear message that discrimination, in any form, has no place in our society. But our work isn't done. This is a call to action for all of us to examine our biases and work towards a more inclusive world. The case became a landmark, cited in legal textbooks and discussed in corporate boardrooms. It sparked a nationwide conversation about implicit bias and the responsibility of individuals to challenge discriminatory behavior, regardless of their social or economic status. As the media frenzy subsided, Aisha found herself with unprecedented opportunities to effect change. She was invited to consult on diversity policies for major corporations, speak at international conferences, and even advise on legislation aimed at protecting immigrant rights. The cafe incident, which had seemed like a simple confrontation months ago, had catalyzed a movement. Aisha, once a struggling immigrant waitress, had become a symbol of resilience and a catalyst for social change. Her journey from that fateful day in the cafe to the courtroom victory had not only transformed her life, but had also left an indelible mark on the fabric of society, challenging long-held prejudices and paving the way for a more equitable future.